Okay, so we're into the next part, guys, of adding power to your ppump 12 valve. Now at this point, you really need to decide whether or not, or how much power you want to make. So if you want to get into, if you're heavy towing, not so much hot rodding the truck, using it as a, I guess I would say a work truck, towing a heavy RV trailer, towing a trailer all the time, that kind of thing, I would probably, you're probably going to want to stay below 375 horsepower. Now, the reason for that is you can build the engine to the nines. You could make, a solid 650, 700 horsepower truck that will tow up anything. The issue is that you can't keep them cool. So that's the issue that I run into with my truck. Now, my truck in the summer tune, it runs about, let's say 750 horsepower. And I can tow with it at that, but you're not using all the fuel. You're using a fraction of the fuel. Once in a while, yeah, you get into it and, do it. But if you're using a bunch of the fuel that's there, the biggest issue is the cooling system is just not up to the task. Now, I've done a bunch of stuff to my truck to help with that. It has an oversized oil cooler. It has an external oil cooler. I run the new style aluminum radiator in it, which I'm probably going to upgrade again. So I've done that to help dissipate heat. And I still have heat issues with it, just not near as much as I did before. So if that's something you don't want to get into, and I understand you don't want to get into having to play around with, letting your foot out of the throttle, the truck overheating and that type of stuff, you want to stay you're going to want to stay below that 350 to 375 horsepower while you're towing. Now, you can turn the truck up and down, don't get me wrong, and there is a bunch of different ways to do that. Whether it be with an adjustable fuel plate or an adjustment of rack travel, or AFC travel, you can do it a couple different ways. And I have the way I do it, and then there is a couple other companies that do it. Now, that being said, if you've done all the mods that I've talked about in the video, then we have got to the point where you got air coming in, you got air going out, you got all your fluids are changed, you got no boost leaks, all that type of stuff. So that's perfect. So you're in a good spot. The engine's sound at this point. You're good. And valve springs too. So if you've done everything on that list, gauges as well, forgot about gauges, you've got all that stuff done on the list. Now, at this point, you are basically to the point where you have to decide, like I said earlier in the video, how much power you want to make. So you can make on a stock transmission, so it either be a 47RH or a 47RE. The RE is the electronic version, the other one is the mechanical version, which is half electronic, half mechanical. But anyways, you need to decide on how much power you want to make, because at this point, you can't make much more power than you're making and not either toast the clutch or toast transmission. So I guess we're going to have to get into talking about clutches, talking about torque converters, talking about transmissions. Now, I probably will get into, I will talk a little bit about transmissions, and we'll talk a little bit about that stuff right now. But I don't really have anything to show you guys. But if you're, getting into a clutch, there's lots of different clutch manufacturers. Valair is a good one. Also, South Bend is a good one. I've used both of those, never had an issue. There's also Clutch Masters as well, and they have an aluminum flywheel. And they're actually, I drove one of those for the first time there a few weeks ago, and they're also a nice clutch as well. I don't have a lot of experience with those ones, so I don't have a lot of first-hand knowledge for you. I've used a lot of South Bend clutches. Now, one thing that you want to watch with South Bend clutches, or I shouldn't say watch, one thing that you want to watch with any clutch is that the horsepower rating, in my eyes, on them is going to be at flywheel, not at wheel horsepower. So if you have a clutch that is good for 450, it's going to be for 450 flywheel horsepower, not wheel horsepower, which is between 15 and 20% difference on the higher or on the lower side on the wheels than on the crankshaft. I don't know if they've changed that in the last while or if it's still the same way. But that's the rule of thumb that I give it is you want to figure out what you're making at the wheels, subtract 20%. That's what you want to have a clutch to hold. And if you do that, you tend not to have issues. So for most guys, if you're staying in that 300, let's say between 350 and 400 horse, you can go with a single disc, organic clutch with a new flywheel and hydraulics, and you're good to go. Now you do want to make sure you have good tranny fluid. You want to replace, I would replace the tranny fluid with the proper fluid, whether it be Chrysler fluid, GM fluid, which is the same as the Chrysler fluid, or AMSOIL. I think Redline makes one. Hot Shot Secrets makes one, I believe. There's a bunch of different ones. But as far as the standard side of things goes, you know, you can do very little modifications as far as the standard goes. I would say probably up into the 450 to 500 horsepower range. And then, in my opinion, if you want to make that and you want to use the truck all the time, you should be going to an automatic. Now, I know we'll probably get all kinds of people that have a hate on for that because they like their standard transmissions. And don't get me wrong, I have had lots of standard transmissions, but I've broke lots of standard transmissions. So I've got to the point now where if all my trucks, unless I'm using it as a very simple truck, it will have an automatic transmission in it. Now, built automatic transmission, but nonetheless an automatic transmission. So anyways, get into the automatic transmission. So getting into the automatic transmission. Now, if you want to, you don't have to have a crazy built transmission to hold, let's say 450, 500 horsepower. Above that, you're getting into a transmission that's going to cost you money. You really need to have, a triple disc torque converter. I would recommend that. You can do a single disc if you're going to stay lower than that. But I put triple disc in all my stuff. So a triple disc torque converter, and there again, depending on what your power rating is going to be, or what your power is going to be, how big of a turbocharger you're running, all that stuff is going to make for setting up stall. And that's another video entirely. But really, talk to who's going to be building your transmission. That is going to be your best bet on that. And because whoever's building your transmission kind of needs to help you tailor the transmission to the truck. So triple disc torque converter, I personally would do a billet input shaft at the very least with the billet torque or with the triple disc torque converter. And then also you can upgrade clutches, upgrade clutch count. You're going to be upgrading line pressure, that type of stuff. But like I said, we'll get into that in another video. But you're definitely going to want to go into the transmission, the power level where you are now. If you don't go into the transmission, you're going to kill the transmission. So go talk to a local transmission builder, somebody that's close to you, somebody that has a reputation building performance transmissions. I recommend there again somebody close, because if you have an issue, then you can take it directly to them to fix it. So now that being said, we've got the transmission side of things done. So if you got that all done, that's all remedied. Now you can add more fuel and more air to the system. Now before you start, I guess, getting into bigger injectors, bigger delivery valves, and more turbocharger, if you haven't done an intake horn, I would recommend doing an intake horn. Whether it be a Banks dual ram, which I like. Pusher Intake has a single and a dual ram. There's a whole bunch of different companies. Banks makes a single ram as well. I don't know if they make it for a 12 valve anymore, but they used to. But there's all kinds of different manufacturers that make that stuff. You guys hit Google, you can see it on Google. I personally have a dual ram, one that I built for the first gen, and then I also have one for my 95. That one I didn't build. That one's actually a Banks one. And I don't know, one's better than the other, but it's one of those things. But you want to get the air in, and I would recommend doing that for sure. So at this point, if you got your transmission or clutch remedied, you got your drive shafts checked out, all the fluids changed. You want to make sure everything's in top-notch shape. Make more power, you need stuff to be in good shape. You don't want to throw a front drive shaft and tear a bunch of stuff up. So you got your intake horn, you got transmission, you got your intake horn. Now, when you're doing your intake horn, what I would do is I would pull your fuel plate out. And then I would also do the AFC modification to give you more rack travel. And if your ability allows you to, I would be putting a Mac rack plug in it, which is on the front of the pump. Some cases will allow you to get it out. Some cases you have to loosen the pump, slide the pump back to get it out. So just depending on what you feel comfortable doing. And at that point, with those two done, you got basically as much fuel as you can get out of the stock setup as it sits, right? So you really need, at that point, you need to be, I personally believe in head studs, and I'm an ARP guy. Yeah, they're more expensive than the, I don't know if you want to, the economy brand, I guess you would say. The economy brand has not proven themselves to me yet, so I haven't run them. I'm actually going to try them on a couple of my engines, just to try them out and see, because it is a good, it's a good cheaper option for somebody. But you get into high horsepower race applications, I personally would be going with a tried and true, because it's expensive. The downtime, you can't be out having fun with the truck if it's broke down. So that kind of sucks. So, like I said, you should really need to be holding that head gasket down. Unless you just want to retorque your factory head bolts, you can retorque them to 110 foot-pounds and run it till it blows the head gasket. So, as long as you're keeping your EGTs in check and the engine is good, you're all right at that point. So, when you guys get to that point, and so you've dealt with your transmission, you've done an intake horn, you've done the AFC modification with a spring, Mac rack plug, you've done your head studs, and at the same time as your head studs, I personally would be putting a set of push rods in, but that's there again, you don't have to with 60-pound springs, but there again, it's cheap insurance, and you get a little, I don't know if you get much more power, but you get less deflection out of it, so it's a little easier on stuff. So I would recommend doing push rods as well. So at this point, now you've basically maxed the system out as far as the way it sits right now. The next step, you're going to have to add more air, and you're going to have to add more fuel. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it off there for this part, just so we don't get too long into it and too expensive into it, because this step is a relatively expensive step if you haven't gone past this step. Because, doing clutch transmission work, head studs, the AFC stuff isn't too expensive. And then the intake horn, there again, not horribly expensive, but, it costs money nonetheless. So we're going to stop the video here. Anyways, so if you like the video, like, subscribe. I'll get more content. You got more questions, any of that type of stuff, hit me down below. Hit me down below on any of the videos. Watch the videos. I got all kinds. I got, I think, 63, 64 videos right now. I'm striving to have 150 videos in the next few months. So we, get a bunch more content for you guys and get this thing rolling. So anyways, we'll catch you on the next one.